Probability is often used day to day. We hear it all the time with the weather. The probability that it's going to rain, the chance of rain is 30%. Probability can be used either as a fraction, where in reality, a fraction, like a ratio, for example, if I said to you, what is the probability that I am going to flip tails on my coin? Well, you only have two outcomes.
50%.
You only have two outcomes, either heads or tails. So the probability that you are going to flip a tail is one that there is out of two total outcomes. You could write that as a fraction, or like many of you guys said, 50%. 50% is the percent. And remember from our ratio, rates, and fractions unit that in order to change a fraction to a percent, you divide. You make the fraction a decimal. Remember we said fractions are really division symbols, numerator over denominator. That's the reason why we do 1 divided by 2, and when we do our long division, we get 0.5, which then changed to a percent, move it 2 to the right, is 50%. So the probability of something happening can be written as a fraction, as a decimal, or as a percent, because it is a ratio. Now, if I was to look at the true textbook definition of probability, we know that probability is not a predictor, a definite prediction. It is the likelihood something is going to happen in theory. In theory, based on what we know and what we have. So we call the type of probability that we're going to be discussing theoretical probability. And like I just explained, theoretical probability is the ratio of the number of ways an event can occur to the total number of possible outcomes. Mathematically, we write that as this. The P of an event, the probability of whatever the event is equal to the number of favorable outcomes, in other words, how many possibilities there are for that specific outcome, out of the total number of possible outcomes. So in our coin flipping experience, we said, what is the probability that you're going to flip a tails? And we know that the number of tails is the outcomes that we want. So the favorable, there's one tail out of two total sides. That's how you write probability. So if I said to you, a student council representative is to be chosen from a class containing 12 boys and 16 girls. What is the probability that a girl will be chosen? Well, the probability that a girl will be chosen is 16 out of a total of 28. So the probability that a girl will be chosen is 16 out of 28, which can then be simplified, if I wanted to simplify it to a fraction, to 4/7. If I wanted to make it into a decimal, I would divide 4 divided by 7, top divided by bottom, top in the house. Add my zeros, do my multiplication. 7 times 5 is 35. Subtract, bring down the 0. 7 times 7 is 49. Subtract, bring down the 0. And then I would keep on going, but I would stop at 0.57. And then to change that to a percent, you move it 2 to the right. That's the reason why 16 out of 28. You could also say 4 out of 7, as you see by the fraction, or a 0.57 probability, or a 57% probability. You will be asked to either give me the probability as a fraction, decimal, or percent. So please make sure that you understand. First, you got to write it as a ratio. Simplify it. To make it a decimal, it's top divided by bottom, top in the house. And to make it a percent, it's change it to a decimal first and then move it over 2 to the right. Now you try. I want you to imagine that we have a spinner, and I'm sure you all have seen the spinners before. And this spinner, I'm going to spin it. I'm going to flick that little arrow, and it's going to spin around. They're asking me, what is the probability that an even number will be spun?
25%.
Well, we first have to figure out, based off of what numbers we have available, how many are even. Remember that what you are looking to do is to find the probability of an even number out of the total number possibilities. So what is the probability of spinning an odd number? So in this case, the probability of an odd, so there are a total of 3 odd numbers. 3 odd out of 5 total. So as a fraction, the probability is 3/5. If I asked you to write it as a decimal, you would divide it, and as a percent, you would then move the decimal point over. So in that case, it would also just be 60%. If I already found the probability of an even, I know the probability of an odd is the other one. Okay, you guys are going to try these. I have a number cube. I have a dice in which there are 6 numbers, 1, 2, 3, and then I have 4, 5, and 6 on the other sides, like on the bottom, on there, and on the back. 1 through 6. The question is, what is the probability that I'm going to roll a 4? Well, if I'm looking at my dice, I know that out of 6 sides, only one of them is a 4. I have a 1 out of 6 probability.
You just deleted everything.
So 1 divided by 6, when you do it the long way, it gives you 1.6 repeating. So as a fraction, it's 1/6. As a decimal, it's 0.16 repeating. And as a percent, you move it over to the right, and it would actually be about 16.6%. The next one's a little bit more complicated because it's asking me for the probability of 3 items happening. It's asking, what is the probability of rolling a 4, 5, or a 6? Well, 4, 5, or 6 is 3 possibilities out of 6 total, which means you have a 1/2 probability, which as a decimal is 0.5, and as a percent is 50%. The probability that I'm going to roll a 4, a 5, or a 6 is 50%, because you could either roll a 4, 5, or 6 3 out of 6 times. As opposed to the probability of rolling a 3 or a 5, that's 2 out of 6, because 3 is one item and 5 is another, which is 1/3 as a fraction. When you do your division, 1 divided by 3 gives you 0.3 repeating. And as a percent, you're going to move it over 2 to the right, and you get 33.3 repeating percent. Same thing for the probability of 1, 2, or 3. That's 3 probabilities out of 6, which is 1/2, 0.5, or 50%.